Good morning and welcome to the You Know You Deserve More podcast spotlight interview series. I am your host, Stephanie Puryear-Helling, and I am thrilled to welcome my guest and friend, Kelli Lea. Some of you may know Kelli, and for those of you who don't, I want to tell you a little bit about this incredible woman. So Kelli is a Senior Regional Manager at Greystar, and she's also the current president of the National Apartment Association Education Institute, president of the board of directors. She's also past president of the Triangle Apartment Association and co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. She was also awarded TBJ's 40 Under 40 in 2021. I was also a 40 under 40, or maybe it was a Fab 5 under 40 for multifamily executive, but that was a few years ago. So I'm not going to share what year because I don't want anyone doing that. So Kelli has spent over 19 years in property management, including conventional student housing and lease up in some of the most competitive submarkets in the Triangle. She has a commitment to delivering quality service to owners and residents. Her style is uniquely fierce with an understanding and approachable touch. She's also a licensed real estate broker. Kelli was also named the Triangle Apartment Association's Community Manager of the Year in 2014. And she served on the Triangle Apartment Association Board of Directors from 2016 to 2022. And as president of the Triangle Apartment Association from 2020 to 2022. So Kelli, welcome. Thank you so much for saying yes and agreeing to be here with me today to talk about all things leadership, leading change, and building resilient teams. I know you've also volunteered as a leader on other various committees. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll jump in with my questions.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I've been a big fan of watching this podcast, and just to see the folks you've had on, to know that you invited me to be in that circle is, I'm very honored for that. So thank you. You know that I consider you a sister, and we often get complimented that we remind each other of one another. So huge win, very uniquely.
Yes, we do. And I love it every time that happens. And it's funny because, I had Rhonda Puryear on a few weeks ago, and we share a last name, right? Stephanie Puryear-Helling. We don't know if we're related or not. She's a Puryear by marriage, and I'm a Puryear by birth. But her husband and my dad and his family are from within 50 miles of one another in Southern Virginia. So I know there's a connection somewhere. So we call each other cuz. And then you and I call each other sister, although you're obviously the little sister, but I'm honored for that.
Yes. So my leadership journey has really evolved, right? So locally is where I started. And of course, as we get into your leadership journey and how to stay involved, that's really the starting point. And so serving on various committees at the Triangle Apartment Association, started in government affairs, and then co-chaired the education committee, and then eventually led to the board stints as well. And then nationally, again, kind of always coming back to education. I started off with NAAEI Gives, which is phenomenal and something I really enjoyed, and then also served on membership and Next Gen. So education is really my home, and I'm so honored to be the president of the board of directors for this year and next year for NAAEI. I also know that we have that in common as well. And so again, I love serving. Education is really the root of the volunteer journey, and I'm so glad it's led me to where I am today.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so thrilled to have you here. And we do have a lot in common, not just looking like sisters, but with our passion for education and leadership, and giving back and serving others and helping to develop other leaders. And so my questions are all about that. And so let's jump right in. My first three actually are about transformational leadership. So obviously you have led people not only within your organization, but as a volunteer leader in various organizations. And your leadership, Kelli, has inspired teams to push beyond their perceived limits. What personal philosophy or experience has shaped your ability to lead in this way?
So I think the experience, any experience is going to shape you as a leader, whether it's good, bad, you're going to learn from it. And so every experience that I have, truly, I mean, from as recent as yesterday, is making me go, oh, how could I adapt? How could I apply? Or how could I not do that at all? From a personal philosophy, I really truly try to be that servant leader. You know, you hear about it, you hear people claim that, but really having that active listening, the empathy, the coming person to person. And so you have, whether you have 5,000 direct reports or a team of 5, or if you're really collaborating as peers, that you might be the leader of that group, you've got to come with kind of this empathy and this active listening. That's really what I focus on. And so I always try to give feedback. I always say failure is feedback. It's not terrible. Failure is feedback. And I actually just went through that this morning with someone. So I really think from a personal philosophy, having the servant leadership, not how can I come in here and run the show, but how can we get there together, get on someone's level, find out where they're starting and how you can get to the finish line. That's really what's helped me as a leader connect and move things forward. And I really try to instill that in others that might be on my team or in my peer set for sure.
I love that. So I really liked what you said about being a servant leader and using empathy and active listening. I think that's huge. I had a Susan Sherfield on my podcast yesterday, also a past president of EI. And as we were talking about our different leadership styles and situational leadership, we talked about how important it is to not just focus on your own style as a leader, but really the important thing is to focus on what people you're leading need. And so when you talked about empathy and active listening, that's so huge. I also love what you said that I put up here on the screen, that failure is feedback and it's how we learn. And, you know, failure is first attempt at learning, right? And I think that people fear failure, and that's natural. We're human and we're emotional. Some of us, like me, are recovering perfectionists, right? And so the former version of me, who was much more of a perfectionist and much more of a people pleaser, probably had a higher fear of failure because you don't want to disappoint people. You don't want to mess up. But that fear of failure can hold you and your team back. And when we embrace the fact that failure is first attempt at learning, and it's also part of success, I think that empowers not only us as leaders, but also our team. I think we have to create safe environments where it's okay to fail, because that is how we learn. And if we create environments where people are afraid to fail or afraid to mess up, we truly are handicapping them from getting better and leaning into their strengths and becoming a better team member, a better individual contributor, and a better leader overall. So I love that you shared that with our listeners. Okay, so my next question is, I got to take my glasses off and on because, you know, this is what happens when you get older. All right. I want to talk about emotional intelligence a little bit. And I love that EQ and emotional intelligence has been much more of a focal point over the last 10 or 15 years in business, where it really didn't used to be. Speaking of expressing empathy and active listening, right? So when you think about emotional intelligence, Kelli, how has emotional intelligence played a role in your success as a leader? And what advice would you give to aspiring leaders looking to strengthen this skill?
Absolutely. It is so true. I mean, 10 years ago, no one even heard of EI, EQ, anything about it. And it's really become so important to have, not only in your personal leadership, but also in organizations. And so really what I take away from kind of EQ overall is self-awareness. If you don't know where you're starting, what you're portraying, what your biases are or your triggers, then how can you not only see that in others, but help kind of pull it out, coach others, whatever that might be. So actually just most recently at the North Carolina Legal and Education Conference Connected, it just ended yesterday. There was a great session and we talked and we kind of scored ourselves through an assessment. And what I found out was that I am luckily on kind of the higher end of the EQ, but certainly not the highest. And I think that's where, this is not something where you're always going to get 100 on a test. This is an area that you're always evolving, because you have to be aware of your biases, and they're not going to necessarily go away overnight because someone tells you that it needs to go away. Change takes time. Change takes patience. It takes collaboration. And so kind of knowing that you've got to come to things from a different approach for yourself personally to get through it, and then go through that with your team, having that collaborative approach. Really having the social skills. If you can't talk to people and kind of get them to feel you, then how are they going to do anything for you? And so that's something you can't really teach. But if you know those maybe introverts or ones that don't want to say, really just nudging them and making them know that they have a voice at the table, that you want to hear their opinion, or maybe they do need to wait until after the meeting to share with you. I think you mentioned it's like the hardest part is kind of changing that leadership style with people. It's people management. And we've got to change that to deliver it to each individual. And I really think EQ, EI plays such a big role in that, and starting with yourself and then finding it in others.
Absolutely. And always, always starting with yourself. John Maxwell says frequently, and I repeat this frequently, but in order to lead others effectively, you must first lead yourself. And often the person in the mirror is the hardest person to lead, right? So you have to start with yourself before you can truly effectively lead others. And earlier you talked about empathy and active listening. And when it comes to emotional intelligence, really understanding how each person comes to the table, what their preferences are. It's not a one size fits all approach. You do need to understand, as you mentioned, whether people lean towards introversion, lean towards extroversion, making it a safe space for them to share their feedback, and also making it clear that every single voice matters. And I do agree with you. If someone tends to be a bit more introverted or has a hard time speaking up in front of the group, giving them an opportunity to come to you either prior to or after the meeting is key, with the caveat of sort of leading them and teaching them and coaching them to be more comfortable speaking up in the meeting, because that's really where the healthy debate and conflict and conversations happen. And we want to encourage that. So really everyone has a voice in the meeting, but sometimes it requires baby steps to get someone there, right?
That's right. That's right. And one thing about me is I have to wear a couple of different hats at different times. So within my organization of my regular job, and then in our volunteer journey as well. And so sitting as president of a board, as you know, it's really exactly that. It is making sure that every voice is heard and that you're going around and you're hearing, but you also have to move whatever the goal is, right, of the association, and kind of get to that one big idea, that one big motion, whatever it might be, and make sure that although there might have been some questions or some discussion, that we as a whole need to move this forward. And so it really, really plays a part. I love taking what we do as members of a board and putting it into kind of that real world job experience too, because just in little conference rooms, it really does apply in both settings.
Absolutely. And I think, as a volunteer leader, we are leading people who don't report to us, right? They are volunteers. And so being able to influence people in that setting when they don't have to listen to you and they don't report to you, it's a great learning opportunity to really apply emotional intelligence and to lead people through influence, which John Maxwell says, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And so it's a great opportunity for us in volunteer leadership positions to really flex that muscle. Okay, so my next question, looking back on your career, can you share a moment where you recognized that your leadership had truly transformed or impacted a team or individual?
This one's tough. I think as women in general, we are naturally not the ones to kind of say, yes, I did that, or yes, that's my little protege, and kind of celebrate our successes. I am really actually trying to work on that, and I encourage a lot of women to work on that. But I can think of something specifically. It was a few years ago, kind of when I stepped into a corporate role, we went through a leadership talent assessment, and you're probably more familiar with this. It was kind of a 360 feedback program. And so you rate yourselves, and then you have your peers, your colleagues, and your supervisors go through a rating. And what I realized is I was extremely hard on myself, and I rated myself much lower. And so it was kind of that eye-opening experience where it was seeing where my direct reports and peers rated me on so many things. Just my ability as a leader, my adaptability, my openness. And that's when I realized I was more than what I was giving myself credit for. And so I really honed into that in what my reports and peers had kind of thought of me and said, wow, I am really good at those things. And so that helped me really hone in on my strengths. And then also at the same time, look at the weaknesses and start to build the team around me that could help with those weaknesses. And so while I can tell you the people that have been promoted under me and this and that, I used to say, oh, that's not me, that's all them. I'm going to get a little bit better at taking some of the credit, right? Because I do think that we as leaders, we naturally just kind of see the lights in those minds, the light bulbs clicking, and we say, okay, that person has talent. And so I've got a few certainly within our organization that I really have liked to think that I've contributed to their success. And I hope I'm continuing to do that with anybody that I am supervising, mentoring, someone I've supervised in the past. It doesn't just stop when someone gets that promotion or that role. It's a constant relationship. And I certainly have that with peers above me, and then even not in our organization, right? If you don't have that circle of mentors and leaders around you that are just constantly pulling you, then you need to get that circle.
Absolutely. So I want to dig into a couple of your comments. And you said, women tend to have a harder time taking credit or accepting compliments. Why do you think that is?
I don't know if it's just this is how we're programmed. We're a little bit more sensitive just by nature, but I also think when you look around and you think of leaders, you are often thought of as these, Wall Street, aggressive, certain approaches that are just not what we as women are necessarily classified as or consider ourselves. And so I think that it's just as good of a strength to be kind of aggressive and loud and this and Wall Street and ringing the bell, to be this empathetic leader that has this huge support system. And that, I think over the past several years of what the world has gone through, that power of connection has really, really proven itself more important than just someone who's kind of barking orders and moving things forward. You want to surround yourself with people you like. You want to work for people that you like. And now with jobs being much more flexible than they are, I mean, people are really focusing on the people, the culture, the everything else that comes around it than just the person that's leading. And so, we as women, even when someone says, this actually just came up earlier this week too, oh my gosh, I love your earrings. We're so quick to say, oh my gosh, I got them on clearance at Target, right? I mean, I do it every time. Why don't we just say, oh, thanks, and act like they're $1 million, right? Yeah. It's just the way we're programmed. And so I think getting out of that and just having that confidence, taking the compliments, taking that into our leadership style as well is crucial.
Yeah. This came up last week when I was coaching a friend, actually, and she was receiving several compliments on her contributions for organizing an event. And every time she's like, oh, it wasn't me. I had a good team. And I do think there's always value in giving your team credit. I think a leader should always do that. But I coached her. I was like, okay, next time when someone tells you that, I want you to say, thank you so much. And I also had a great team to help. But say thank you. Practice saying thank you and accepting that compliment. It's not only good for you in order to build your confidence, but it really is the nice thing to do for the person providing the compliment, right? Because if you've ever been on the receiving end when you've complimented somebody and they just really couldn't take it, that doesn't feel good to the person giving the compliment, right? It's a little awkward. And so
Right.
I think the more we practice just graciously saying thank you, that can help. And that came up again this week when I was facilitating a leadership session, where we were talking about Clifton strengths and diving deep into those for leaders. And, I commend the team for being really vulnerable, just like you were. So thank you for that. And sharing, where they were, some areas where they were struggling. And there were a few who, again, tend to be people pleasers or perfectionists or recovering perfectionists, have a hard time sort of accepting compliments. And so we practice that a little bit. And I don't know if you've read this because it's been around for a while, but there's a book called Girls Stop Apologizing, because women tend to overly apologize or overly explain when they don't need to. And, for the men listening either live or later catching the replay, this is not just a gender, unique issue, although statistically speaking, more women tend to be challenged in this area. So that's a great book that I would recommend for you, Kelli, or any listener, Girls Stop Apologizing. Because yes, apologizing when you're wrong as a leader is so important and huge, but apologizing when it's not necessary,
Right.
undermines the contributions that you've made. And there are ways to word that differently, right? So rather than apologizing, you can say something like, well, thank you so much for your patience. If someone had to wait on you for something, right? Or if you had to change a schedule, thank you for your flexibility, rather than apologizing it away and then giving the person way more information than they needed to know about
Right.
why you needed to reschedule. TMI, just say, thank you so much for your flexibility. I'm glad we're able to make this work, and move it on. And generally speaking, men tend to be much better at that, right? So love this conversation. Okay. So my next section, I want to talk to you a little bit about leading change. So you've led several different teams, both within your organization and as a volunteer leader, through change. What are some key lessons you've learned about overcoming resistance that happens naturally, and ensuring smooth transitions?
You said it. Resistance is natural. We are in an ever-changing environment, especially in this industry. In my organization specifically, we are change leaders, and we love that about us. And so you've really got to start with the why of the change. Even if you don't necessarily understand it at the moment, then you can't go to your team and say, we need to change this. You need to take the minute, discover the why, buy into the why, support the why, so that you can then express it with your teams. There's going to be that natural resistance. It's going to come from there's too much change at once. It's going to come from I'm no longer in control of this. What does this mean? And you've got to be the one as the leader that just says, I'm here. We're going to get through it together. And again, it may not make sense at the time, but continually reminding of the why. So kind of that constant communication, the I'm in it with you, the celebrating the wins. I feel like I say that a lot, so I don't know if I've said it yet, but if it's a big process of change, celebrate each little progress along the way and each little win, and not just focus on the tedious tasks as a part of the change. And so again, getting the people to respect you as the leader, letting them know you're in it with them is really a key part of getting through some of that resistance. And then you get to celebrate the success in the end together as a team.
Oh my gosh, 100%. And so much of what you said is like textbook change management. So that's another area that I speak on. I went to a change management certification program several years ago through the American Society of Training and Development. And there is a natural process to change. There's also a natural cycle. So I love that, we both said resistance is natural, like it will happen. And I think often when organizations are struggling with change, and statistically, and this is from Gallup, 75% of change efforts fail in organizations.
Oh.
And they fail because people aren't communicating effectively. They don't pull people in and make them part of the change. They're not providing the right level of emotional support during the change process. And they kind of want to smooth over that, like, get over it, it's going to be fine. Well, we can't do that because humans are emotional beings that are sometimes logical. And we like to pretend that they're not, but they are. Humans are emotional beings that are sometimes logical. And so people are naturally going to go through this emotional cycle where they might deny that the change is happening, right? Or they try to bargain their way out of it. This is the way we've always done it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, et cetera, et cetera. And some people will fall into the pit. Most people fall into the pit a little bit. Some take a longer time to climb out of it. And so if we're not aware that that's naturally going to happen, and we're not aware that people are going to need, in some cases, a pretty hefty amount of emotional support, it's not going to work. And so I loved everything that you talked about in terms of frequent communication, providing that support, being there with them along the way, and celebrating those quick wins, because that helps to keep the motivation and the momentum going. It's just like when we all learn to ride a bike, right? What happens? You're going to fall down. You're going to skin your knee. The training wheels are still wobbly and you're afraid you're going to fall, all the things. But the person who taught you to ride that bike, whether it was your parents, your uncle, your grandparents, what did they do? They're like, okay, you're going to be fine, but let me kiss the boo-boos. Let me hug you. Let me wipe away the tears. Okay, now we're going to get back on there and we're going to try again. But look, you went, you went half block. Oh my gosh. It's that analogy is so much like what we need to do during change. And then eventually it's smooth sailing. But the smooth sailing doesn't happen without bumps and bruises and falling. And I think that's another part of change that sometimes we gloss over, how difficult it's actually going to be, because we've got our current state, we've got this future state that's like pie in the sky where we want to be, but getting there isn't a pretty process. Oftentimes it's difficult, it's painful, it's ugly, it's messy. Things break before they get better. And acknowledging that for people can go a long way to set the expectation that, hey, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and there's going to be some bumps and bruises and maybe some tears, and maybe some arguing and conflict, but we're going to get there together. We're not going to give up and it's going to be okay. So,
right. So not only is it natural, but again, I love that you said acknowledging it. Like this is uncomfortable and it's okay. This is new for all of us. And one thing I just wanted to add is, I'm actually still working on this as myself, is finding the people that really embrace the change, or even if it's just a task that they've done very well and it's a step in that process, and getting those people to kind of start influencing the others. Yes. I'm wanting to do that myself and try not to do it all and be the leader. Let the peers that are those other natural leaders. It's a lot of times easier to lead peer to peer than it is supervisor to peer. And so that's something that's really helped me in times of change. And I'm leaning into that a bit more.
I love that so much, Kelli, that you brought that up. Back when I was with Greystar several years ago, we were going through a change initiative where we were moving to more paperless processes. And we'd identified 8 key areas and established metrics and all the things. But part of our strategy in that was to go visit the sites who were the pioneers, if you will, the first ones to adopt some of these new processes. And of course, we talked to the people who were struggling, but we also talked to the people who were doing really well. And we interviewed them. We interviewed several of them on video, both, managers, assistant managers, leasing, and the maintenance team who were doing mobile maintenance, which was really hard for a lot of them. But we found the service technicians who loved it. And we got them on video to not only talk about how they'd adopted it and that, they were skeptical at first, but this is how it's helping them. But we used some of those service technicians to actually help train the others who were still struggling. And to your point, I think that goes a really long way, because it's one thing to hear from the learning and development team or the regional managers or vice presidents of, hey, we're going to do this, it's going to be awesome. But when you're leveraging the people who are like them, right? Yes. They can see themselves in them who are actually doing it and who've adopted it. That can go such a long way. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Huge.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything to add there before we move to our next question?
No.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about diversity, and you've been involved in DE&I. And, I really think some organizations were doing a pretty good job with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But during COVID, actually, more organizations embraced having a formal diversity, equity, and inclusion program finally, which I think in some respects was in response to Black Lives Matter and all of the strife that was going on in our country during those times of change. So as you think about, organizations, you and I both know that organizations thrive when they embrace diverse perspectives. How have you seen inclusive leadership contribute to successful transformations?
Gosh, it's so hard to even summarize kind of how I've seen this work. It's something that you don't even necessarily think about, or you wouldn't have thought about. Some of us that, might not necessarily have these known biases. And again, over the years, really, as you mentioned, since COVID, it's really come about with educational opportunities for myself and our teams to see biases, work through them, and really open the eyes of this inclusivity. And so what I found, again, kind of looking at it from my board hat, is it's not if you have the same voices around the table, and that can mean a lot of things. What they look like, where they're coming from, their experiences, their titles within their companies, then you will get the same result. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to have, again, it's not only about color of skin or age, it's really about having such a diverse group of experiences around a table to drive the change, to make that decision, to pitch that new deal, whatever it might be. You've got to have the diverse experiences and voices behind it. And I think we talked about this earlier, in that there are some people, one thing that I really, I do love about myself, if that sounds crazy, is I can read the room really well. And so I tend to know when someone is uncomfortable with something we're talking about, or maybe doesn't support the decision that the board is going in. And so I'll make sure to kind of pause. It's that power of a pause, right? Not only for yourself in certain situations, but especially in more in-depth discussions, and really allowing every voice to be heard. You can, again, kind of take someone to the side and make sure they feel heard and supported. But, I think, again, if you have the same voices, the same experiences, you will never drive change or innovation or anything else that comes with it. And so I really strive to be an inclusive leader. It's something I can continue to work on. I think all of us can continue to work on, but I've really seen organizations that have done it very well. Again, just innovation and everything has moved so forward that it's got to be such a pillar of our core values and our everyday as leaders from here moving forward.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, because you mentioned, your ability to kind of read the room and intuitively, pick up on cues. What's your MBTI, your Myers-Briggs? Do you know?
Oh gosh, yes. Okay. I am ENFJ.
Me too.
Oh my gosh, stop.
That's a whole other session. So is Susan Sherfield, by the way. She's an
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we'll have another session to talk about that. But that tracks for me. And so leaning into that intuition, right? And really being able to read the cues from others, I think, is a great skill and strength in order to lead people effectively. Do you happen to know your Clifton strengths or your DISC profile? Have you done either one of them?
I have done a DISC. I don't recall, but I will let you
We'll
know.
follow up on that. And if you want to do Clifton strengths, we'll talk about that too, because that would be super fun. I'm an assessment geek, and I have been since I was like 17. I love it. I love learning what makes people tick.
Yes.
Okay. So my next set of questions is about resiliency, which is something else that I'm hugely passionate about. And I help people to build resilient teams. I am also writing a book, though, about personal resiliency. I'm a little behind. I was hoping to be done last year, but it's one of those things that's continually on my to-do list, but look for that. So
you're a little busy, so it's okay.
A little bit, yeah. But it's about putting it on, time blocking, putting it on your calendar and making it happen. So I am holding myself accountable to that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about building resilient teams and personal resiliency as a leader. So my first question, how have you cultivated resilience within your teams, and what strategies have been most effective in keeping morale high during challenging times?
Oh man. There's little things matter, right? And so I think we said earlier, celebrating the wins, being that support system for your teams, the small check-ins of, hey, how are you? Even if I type an email and it's something that's, on fire at the moment, I make sure, or a Teams chat, I make sure that it's oh gosh, I didn't even say good morning, right? And so I edit it back and I say, good morning, hope you had the best weekend, right? It's those little things in that moment that I think that my teams value from me. And then it kind of helps them have that with their teams, starting their Mondays with conversations and the 5 minutes of how was everyone's weekend before we get into the nitty gritty. We have a tough job, right? No one really knows what the residential property management careers are. It's still a mystery, and we're doing a great job at changing that. But we work really hard, and we are not only property managers, we are therapists, we are accountants. And so really knowing that the resident profile, which for most of us in our industry, that's our main customer, right, is the resident profile has changed so much really since COVID, and how many more folks are working from home, and just everyone's overall mental health state. And so knowing what our folks on the front lines, which are our on-site teams, are dealing with, and acknowledging that, I think just from again, kind of saying, we know what you're going through. Here's a little get together we can have. Here's a little Teams meeting. I try to do an open hours with my team every week. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it gets canceled, but every week at the same time, you can jump on, we can talk nonsense. We can talk about, whatever's happening, or you can say, I need this signed. This is urgent. And so just having that consistent time that your team can come to you, being approachable. I just really think that that's crucial when there is, uncertain times and you need to keep morale high. Just act as a team and be available for your people.
I couldn't agree more. Some of my favorite supervisors that I've ever worked with or for, they really struck a great balance between being available for me, but then letting go and letting me do what I needed to do autonomously, which was huge. But I knew if I needed them, they were only a phone call, a chat, an email away. And I think striking that balance with our team is essential, right? Because no one likes to be micromanaged. We all want clearly defined expectations, and we want to know that, hey, I have someone to go to if I need help brainstorming a solution to a problem, or if truly I'm just overwhelmed and maybe I need 5 minutes to, vent and then come back to center, whatever it is, knowing that they're there is essential. So I loved what you said about being available for them when they need it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. So my next question is, leadership obviously comes with intense pressures. And you just mentioned, how stressful sometimes it can be in the residential property management or multifamily real estate industry. And I was sharing this with Susan yesterday, but one of my business coaches, he says, every problem I've ever had in business has a first name and a last name. People, it's very rewarding working with people. I mean, I'm in the people business. I love it. But because we're humans and we're multifaceted and we're emotional, we can be very challenging. And sometimes the first name and last name that's most challenging in my world is the one in the mirror, right?
Nice.
So leadership does come with intense pressures. How do you personally, Kelli, maintain your resilience and prevent burnout and overwhelm?
I don't do it flawlessly. It's a really A for effort, and sometimes a hands up, I need help. But I think that's part is having that support system and having that trust within your peers and your supervisors and your colleagues that, hey, I need help right now. That's key. And so again, getting that circle. For me, it's really about leading by example for my teams. I really think helps them get less burnt out and stressed, which ultimately feeds to me. And so there are times that we are working, we are burning the midnight oil and I need to crank out reports and emails, but I will not, and any person on my team that's listening, they can tell you this, I do not send emails after hours. I schedule the send so that it comes when they come in the morning. Obviously, if there's truly a fire drill, then I'll communicate. But if it's a to-do list, if it's just a follow up on something, it will always be in the morning. And so I think kind of setting that for myself, then it makes my light bulb go off and say, okay, well, if you're not sending it tonight because you don't want them to see that you're working tonight, why are you working tonight? It's right. So I get in that mindset, and it really helps me. So I have two boys, they're 10 and 11, and they're not little anymore, but they still love my attention. And so we have practices several nights a week. And so if I'm at the ball field, I'll do a little bit of work, but I also make sure that if they're at bat, if they're making a key play, I am all eyes in. And so anybody on my team will know family first, work second, no matter what. And I think leading by example to the teams and colleagues that you work with is really going to help them see that, which then again just returns to you taking less stresses and pressures off you.
Absolutely. And, I think that, as I've been in organizations and worked with various organizations, I think most people give great lip service to saying, we believe in work-life balance, and work-life balance is, so important. And, not reaching burnout is so important, but we don't always model that. Yes. And so if we say, well, our core values are this, or our philosophy is this, but then our behavior is quite the opposite, then what we're really communicating through our behavior is, well, we say this, but we don't really mean it.
Right.
And so I loved that you brought that up, and that we challenge ourselves to kind of think about how are we modeling this to our teams. And again, none of us are perfect. Leadership is not a destination, it's a journey. Right? Resilience is not a destination, it's a journey. We're continuously having to learn and sharpen the saw. But I think the more we can reflect and be self-aware and challenge ourselves to do better, not only are we personally going to be better, but it does help our teams quite a bit. I know in my career, there have been times where I had leaders, again, who really meant it when they said, I believe in family first and work-life balance, but their behavior didn't model that. And as a result, neither did mine, because there were some unspoken expectations that I did need to be burning the midnight oil or sacrificing maybe time with my family. Some of that was self-imposed, I'll be honest. But some of it was what was being modeled to me as well. And I think we learn through experience. You don't ever get a second chance to go to one of your children's recitals, right? Mm-hmm. You don't ever get a second chance to be at your grandmother's burial, mm-hmm. which I'll share a personal story real quick. When I was very young, in multifamily, and I was assistant manager at the time, and I had only one of my boys, I have three, but my oldest was very little. And I was in a new role, and my grandmother had passed away. I'm from Virginia. And it was during the time that the community was doing month-end close. Mm. So I went to the funeral. But then my dad said, well, the burial's not going to be for a couple of days. Can you please stay? And I was like, well, of course, Dad, I want to stay. But I called and asked my manager at the time, who then said, well, I need to ask our regional. Mm-hmm. I said, hey, my grandmother's burial is in a couple of days. I'd really love to stay. Well, they told me no. They said, no, you need to get back and do month-end closeout. Again, I was young. I could have just said, well, I'm just simply not going to be back. I need to be here for my grandmother's burial. But I was young and a people pleaser. And so I flew back
my gosh.
And missed that. Mm-hmm. Who's the only person that's ever going to remember that? Me. Yeah. That I wasn't there for my grandmother and specifically for my dad, but I hadn't learned at that point in my young life and my career how to say no to the right things and say yes to the right things. And so I think that was certainly a life lesson that I like to share with others.
Yeah.
We do have to make decisions. And sometimes, though, the right decision is to burn the midnight oil and to work an 80-hour week because there's a really important project that you're needed on. And that is the right decision. But sometimes the right decision is, okay, this week, my child needs me for this, or my parent needs me for this. And deciding for yourself where those priorities lie, I think is huge. Someone that I talked to a couple of weeks ago said, well, I don't, work-life balance is a myth. And what they were saying is it's a myth when we think that every day we're supposed to be perfectly balanced. Like that's just setting yourself up for failure with that expectation. But that balance comes with making the right decisions at the right time for yourself and the people that are involved, whether it's your team or your family, right?
Right. That's right.
Okay, so my next question, my phone keeps locking out, and that's where I have my Okay, so this next one is about women in leadership, and we referenced this a little bit earlier. But women often face additional expectations or pressures in leadership roles. How have you built resilience in the face of the challenges that are unique to women in leadership?
Again, this is something that I'm still going through. I find my kind of leadership journey to be a bit unique. It seems unique to myself, but what I've realized is that there are so many others like me. And so I think, Stephanie, you and I have maybe talked about this before, but I have been around for, 20 years in the industry. So I was this young and up and comer and the future of the industry. And so shifting that mindset into now having people come to me to be mentor, this, that, and the other. I'm not the young and up and comer anymore. There's people 20 years younger than me that'll run circles around me, right? But, really embracing the fact that I'm stepping into this new leadership role has allowed me to kind of open up to other women and say, how did I get here? And what did I do? And where do I still want to go? And I think one of the things is remaining curious, right? Asking all the questions, taking the notes on the sidelines if it's not the opportunity to be asking the questions, observing those behaviors of the ones that you want to be like. So actually, the same education conference we had, someone said, if this person's peers are all getting promoted and this person's always getting the raise, why are you not friends with that person? Right. And so somebody actually said that to me recently. Wow, it seems like a lot of your managers are having growth opportunities and this and that. Like, what are you doing that's different? And I said, well, I'm just looking for opportunities. I'm coaching them. I'm really digging into what they want. So I could go down a rabbit hole about that. But I think women specifically, we talked about it earlier with just that, not having the apologies, the excuses, the over-explaining, accepting the compliments. We, especially in the multifamily world, there are a lot of women in leadership. Now, the higher up you go, there's maybe not as many, but that's going to change because we're amazing. But I really think, we're the ones that are driving the day-to-day operations and the hiring and really the future of the industry. And so it's walking with a little bit more confidence in your step and in your voice and in your decisions. And if you don't quite have that yet, again, find someone that you think does, get them in your circle. I guarantee you that those folks that you think are just incredible and you've kind of put them on a podium, they would be more than willing to help you, right? And my philosophy is I'm reaching up because I want more, but I'm also reaching back. Who can do it with me? And really focusing on women, but also kind of making sure it's a diverse section of women, experiences, and everything that diversity means. So
I love that so much. So my next question is somewhat related. And when I first started this podcast series, Spotlight series of people in multifamily, it was in preparation for RPM Careers Week. And so I want to focus on RPM careers for a moment. Residential property management careers, for those of you who are like, wait a minute, isn't RPM regional property manager? Yes, it is, but we're talking about residential property management careers. So Kelli, for existing or future leaders wanting to grow their careers, particularly women, but really all, what key advice would you give or offer to those looking to become more successful leaders in this space?
Jump right in. I mean, why wait? Time is ticking, right? All the things you hear, but get involved. You'll hear it from those of us that are involved serving in our associations, but truly it is so impactful, not only because you're helping drive change and drive associations forward, but you're networking and you are just building this peer set. I know if I lost my job tomorrow, I could have a job the next day. And there's something about getting involved and serving within associations that I would certainly attribute that to. You know, as women, again, it doesn't matter gender, it doesn't matter anything. Jump right in, start. And if you don't know where to start, it's okay to step into the wrong room sometimes and go, oh, this is not exactly for me. I remember back in the day, my first committee I joined locally was government affairs. And this was as a very young ACM. I might have even been a leasing professional. And at that time, I walked in and thought, oh goodness, this doesn't excite me. This is a lot of jargon that I don't quite understand yet. Now I've come to very much appreciate government affairs. But again, it took me kind of going into that room and then another one. And then actually someone who you know very well, Suzanne Pratt, who really tapped me and said, education and sit on the committee and be the co-chair and oh, you're next on the board. And so leaning into those that see something in you, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. And then I think as women who have been around for a while, really, we need to be better at soliciting those folks and bringing them with us and looking for them, right? I'm not afraid of future leaders. I'm not afraid of people I need those people to tell me how to do all the techie things that are out there, right? And so really being open and embracing the future leaders, seeing someone at events and going up to them and making sure they feel welcome. It all seems minor, but it's so, so impactful.
It's so huge. And, you know, when I think about my career, I am so thankful that I worked for, you know, Greystar, a company that truly supports people being involved in the industry and giving back. And they supported me speaking, you know, at events years ago before I did this professionally and getting involved. And because of that, I've been blessed to build this wonderful network of people across the country because I had the support of my organization. And I was in rooms where I didn't know sometimes what people were talking about. And but I think that's a great thing. One of the things that my business coach says is if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I fully believe that, right? Both when we are trying to learn and grow ourselves, but also you mentioned not being afraid of younger leaders. And I think that can go for either younger leaders within, you know, volunteer associations, but also the people that we look to hire on our team. We should always look to hire talent that in some ways is smarter than us, right?
Absolutely.
Or has more knowledge than us. That's how you build a solid team. The leader should never be the smartest person. And if you are, then you need to examine your hiring practices because that's not how you build a great team. And that's also not how you build for succession, right? Exactly. So I love that you mentioned that. Well, Kelli, I can't believe that we're almost at our hour. Is there anything else that you want to add or share or tell our listeners before we wrap up?
This has been so fun. I've loved it. I can't believe we're at an hour either. It just feels like we're just chatting here. No, I mean, I truly, if there's anyone else that feels like a me, meaning that I'm not a corporate CEO or executive. And I really have struggled with that in that, am I important enough to be in the room? I'm serving as the president of NAAEI and I kind of thought, well, is my title big enough to do this role? And so you've got to get out of your own way. And I've really, really worked on that over the last year. And people looking at me going, your title doesn't mean a thing. I might be an executive vice president, but I only have 700 units and you have more than that as a senior regional. So don't look at people and be so comparative. Really just, if you're passionate about something, go after it, find the network that's going to just support you, pull you in. I'm lucky to have found that, including you, Stephanie. So I've got a great support system. And, I'm here for anyone that feels kind of like they might be in that in-betweener. I'm really leaning into maybe I am this mentor role. I'm being so used to being a mentee that I'm looking forward to really helping out that next generation. And so if I can help from a professional career, from an industry involvement, from a mom of two, and how the heck do you do it all? I am open. So I'd love to help any listeners that might be going through the same thing that, just want to ask questions and kind of bounce some things off of.
Oh, I love that so much, Kelli. So interestingly enough, ENFJ is also known as the mentor, just so you know. So it's a perfect fit. Yes. And then also, you mentioned about titles. So leadership is not about title or position. It is about influence. As I shared earlier, leadership is about influence, nothing more, nothing less. John Maxwell talks about that all the time. And he also wrote a book called The 5 Levels of Leadership. And the absolute lowest level of leadership is positional leadership, where it's based on title. And people are only following you really because they have to, not because they're choosing to. And so just to reiterate what Kelli said, to you, our listeners, don't get caught up on that title and position. Certainly, when you aspire to do something more, be something more, there is a hierarchy in various organizations, and it's okay to aspire to that next level. But I would challenge you to question, why are you aspiring to go to that next level? Is it because of the title? Or is it because you want to have a broader sphere of influence and make more of a difference and an impact? And hopefully it's the latter, right?
Right.
You want to make more of a difference and an impact, and it's not just about the title. Well, Kelli, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for saying yes. I know our listeners are going to get great value out of this. And so if you're catching the replay, whether it's on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Spotify, please like, comment, share, and give it 5 stars. And tell me what was most impactful to you from listening to this interview with Kelli Lea today. Again, my name is Stephanie Puryear-Helling. This is the You Deserve More podcast Spotlight interview series. Thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one. Make it a great day.